as they looked at the land, they said the land was healthy, the wildlife was abundant, uh, the water was clean. They said, let's move to Texas and live happily ever after. And so, pretty much in the times that I have studied, this is what we've been doing. And so, as the population increases, look at this aerial, high altitude aerial map of Harris County, which is the pink peach line, and look at Houston. And it's almost taking up around 70% of the county's land area. And the northeastern corner, the dark green, is more associated with the pine trees that come out of the East Texas piney woods. And so the land changed, but when I go down to the ground and I look at about 1,000 feet, this is what we're looking at. Now, show me where the Katy Prairie is. Show me that as man has come in and man relishes things about the land, its heritage, its history, we're not doing a very good job at saving components of the land. But what we do know is that in 1823 and prior to European settlement, the natural processes that Mother Nature has working on the earth were all working in Texas. And when you look at these natural processes, primary and secondary succession, the weather, the water and the nutrient cycles, decomposition, fire, the disturbance cycles that we have, birth and death, aging, migration, photosynthesis, genetic adaptation and change, predation and herbivory, and the seasons of the year. But look at the bottom of this slide. Everything that was happening because of continual, everyday disturbance. Today, we look at disturbance might have been a wildfire, it might have been a hurricane, a tornado. And yet, when you look at this list, think about the things that go on every day that the human population does not think about in their daily activity, and that these cycles were occurring just as they are today, but on top of what man is creating. So last week I got an inquiry from a landowner in Bastrop, and she was asking for assistance, but she's talking about weeds. And the reason I put weeds in here is because everything that we have in Texas is turning to weedy species, whether it's the playground, it's our prairies that have been farmed or managed for livestock, or we're putting a development on it. So she said we had the most problems with weeds, and she said a lot of these weeds are giant ragweed, short ragweed, Jerusalem cherry, which is not even native to Texas, and I think it was probably something else that was misidentified. She said doveweed, of which we have 21 species in that genus. And then she said broomweed, cockleburr, and cockleburr's not native, sandbur, speargrass, and some pigweed, thistle, and sunflower in lesser amounts. We have cattle on the property, and it's 130 acres, and it's not subdivided. It's all one pasture. And she complains that the creeks and the brush make it hard to install any fencing if they were going to do any kind of rotational grazing. So she asked, what do we do to get the weeds under control, but leave the cows in the pasture? Should we be spraying or mowing? And should we wait till the spring to work on the weeds? She said, I copied my son, Randall, on the email, and he has attended the beef cattle short course. Isn't that wonderful? That the beef cattle short course has different presentations every year since 1955, and he went to one. So, what is the first thing that stands out in the decisions that she'll end up having to make about the land? And I wrote down a few, because are the weed common names used by this requester enough to determine if the plant is an annual, a perennial, cool season, warm season, and if any herbicide on the market controls that plant? Does it bother you that the whole property of 130 acres is just one pasture with no cross fencing or way to control the rest in the graze period or separate young, high quality, nutrient demanding animals from older animals? Do they run a bull in the pasture 365 days a year? The landowner states that they have Bermuda grass and ryegrass, and they can manage. They they have management, and they want to spend money. And do they have enough time and money to make the two forages that they have? And those are not native plants, but they're from Africa and northern Africa and Italy on the ryegrass. And so, if I'm establishing a new forage base, how would they rest for a year to get a native grass stand started? And if they're getting unwanted woody plants under control, are there any woody plants left to provide shade for the grazers? So think about when people ask questions that, just like the realtor, you don't get the history of the land. All you get is where it is right at this moment in time. So could the land have been plowed? Could it have been like much of the Blackland Prairie, about 99% was plowed and farmed so that man would be able to raise row crops on the best soil that was found in the state of Texas at the time of settlement? Or could it have been in a livestock operation, as in this picture, and yet the thing was constantly being overgrazed, and there are water channels where a lot of the water that should be going into the soil is actually running off of the property. So think about the things that we don't know, because there have been 5 generations of people involved in managing the Fayette Prairie. And all of them except the part of the third generation, the fourth and the fifth, and now the newly born sixth that are alive. Think about the ones that managed it before us, because on this tombstone, notice that this guy in the Moore family was born in 1848. He died in 1914, and his wife Mary was born in 1888. I mean, in 1858, and she died in 1910. The people that managed the land before us, they made decisions. They ran practices on the land that were good at the time they were alive, but whatever they did, they've helped make it look the way it does today. The people, 5 generations of managers in the land. And the problem with it is that a lot of those people are dead. They're buried in cemeteries that are all over the Blackland Prairie. But when I look at this family plot, and the oldest grave in the plot is from 1836, notice what's growing in the cage that hasn't been grazed by livestock. And that in that cage, it hadn't been abused. It's not very big, but the grass that's purplish in the picture, those are the seed heads of little blue stem. And then down in the corner closest to us and across the front, that blue-green plant is yellow Indian grass. So here is a kind of a look back in time along our railroad tracks, in our cemeteries, that if I went back and I now employ management on the land, can I bring it back to what it was in this cage? Or has the land already lost soil? We estimate that the land in Texas has lost from 4 to 24 inches of topsoil, and that many of the nutrients that were in the soil have been lost because of farming. Remember, the wise man said, in life, you do 2 things. You either farm it, you either mine it, or you grow it. And so in farming, we're mining the nutrients out of the soil. And as you know from the Master Gardener program, we have 21 nutrients that are required to grow plants. And many of those nutrients were packed up, put on the truck, and sent to the market. The cow-calf operations, they pretty much defecated and urinated and died on the land, and their nutrients were recycled, except for about 2.5% a year that went in the calf crop when it went to market. So think about the scenarios of change that make the land look the way it does today. So if I'm looking at weeds, here are the 5 steps that she would want to follow to get rid of the weeds. First, step one, get the weeds that she has correctly identified. Because when I start thinking about methodology and I think about chemicals and I think about the biology of the plant, a usable good name that can be communicated in our area is desirable, because we don't have any weed control chemicals that kill everything. Out of the 9 groupings of mode of action, we don't even control half of the number of weeds that have been identified in the state of Texas. So if I have a good name, I want to check the biology. I want to understand how that plant lives, and that if I start to manage it, how is it going to respond? Some management practices might make the weeds get thicker and bigger. And look at step 3. Do the things on the land that help you decrease. You want to do things on the land that help you decrease the seed in the soil seed bank if you want to get rid of weeds, and thus reducing pest plants in the future. Now, look at step 4. With that good name, and if I want to use a chemical, I'm going to have to look at all the chemicals on the market, look at the label on the chemical, look at the names of the plants that the company said this chemical will control, and then I have a good chemical. If the name of your plant doesn't appear on any label, you don't just pick a herbicide and go out there and spray in the night in the dark. You have to have knowledge that the herbicide is going to kill what plants. What is it going to be removing? Well, since World War I, we've been spraying the land, whether it was a prairie, it was a farm, or it was my introduced grazing lands. We have been altering the weeds and the things that'll come back from disturbance for 100 years. So look at step 4. If the chemicals that I'm using or the management practices have not worked, or they were not adequate and doing a good job in controlling the weeds, maybe I need to do something else. So a lot of people spray the same thing every year. So probably not best to keep using the same management tools each year, year after year. No one method or tool can solve all the weed problems. Step 5. When you have picked the first tool of management to attack your weed, begin planning immediately on the next or follow-up tool to use, because no one treatment by any of our current tools is a one-shot success story, and the native weeds will be here after we are gone. So what is the condition of the different pieces of property that make up the Fayette Prairie? It's been owned by so many people. And so we have weeds growing everywhere. And when we look at Texas, we are definitely blessed by having the tall, the mid, and short grass prairies, savannas, shrublands, meadows, gravel washes, high desert grasslands, deserts, riparian areas, floodplains, and tundra. All of those make up what we call rangeland. So 90.7% of the state was labeled as rangeland in the 1845 map of the state when we joined the Union. So, but the rangeland is not treated with the same tools that are used in farming. We're not out there plowing, we're not fertilizing, and definitely we're not irrigating with our current limited supply of water. So if I look at what land was farmed, it was flat land or slightly rolling. where the rangeland can have a varying topography. And if it's a shallow soil, those shallow soils, if they got plowed for farming, we quickly found out they didn't hold enough water to grow the crop, or a drought came, and those farming areas were abandoned to what we see being used today. So the deeper soils, the flatter lands, that's what became farmland in Texas. So a lot of the Blackland Prairie, about 99.5% of it, has been farmed at one time or another. So plant identification, it is so important because it is the key to all knowledge about the plants that exist on the various pieces of the Fayette Prairie today. And they tell us things. So look at what Spencer wrote in 1940 in a book, Just Weeds. Spencer stated that a weed is a plant out of place in the eye of man. In the struggle for existence, a bad weed is a prince. It has the traits of a Bonaparte or Hitler. Give it an inch and it will take a mile, all because nature has endowed it with super vitality, as well as with a few characters that make it useless to man and beast. That is the nature of the worst weed. Well, what kind of weeds are we dealing with on the prairie? Are they weeds that are responding to drought disturbance? They're weeds that are that they come up after a hurricane, or they emerge with fall rainfall when the summer has been dry. What do they do? And so why are they there? And so weeds are on all of our land, but humans have to learn to look at them and what story they're telling us in a different way. So Darlington said, the labors of the agriculturist are a constant struggle. He wrote this in 1859. On one hand, by presenting the most favorable conditions possible, he endeavors to make certain plants grow and produce to their utmost capacity. And on the other hand, he has to prevent the growth of certain other plants that are ready to avail themselves of the same favorable conditions. Have you thought about that? That the things you do to make the prairie grasses grow might almost be the exact things to make the woody plants, our brush species, and the weeds grow. So we have to look at what's happening. A weed and a brush, we don't, those are not names of plants in Texas. Those are categories. And when people use them, it usually signifies that they don't know the name of the plant they are looking at, but it's something that they want to get rid of. So look at this picture of the Blackland Prairie in Falls County in 1952. And this is a piece of property that was hayed one time of year at the end of June, the 1st of July, to maximize nutrients and the standing crop. And then it was rested for the rest of the year. How often did bison come on the Blackland Prairie? The bison book, printed in 2003, it tells us that the bison went to the same place to eat once a year to once in every 10 years. So we have changed that model, and being a privately land-owned state, we fence everything out because a fence keeps something in or it keeps something out. So look at the Hopman Meadow over in Washington County in 1952. Where are the weeds? Where's the mesquite? Where's the Wasatch? Where's the Yopon? Where's the Eastern Red Cedar? Where are they taking over? And again, as a meadow, this was actually cut for hay one time of year. Look at this one in Grimes County, over near Navasota, and it was cut once a year. But look at how much grass is left. What do Bermuda grass people do today? They want to get every leaf or they're not going to make enough money to pay for their fertilizer. But look how equipment worked on our native prairie when they were cutting it, when we didn't have the equipment of today. They left enough stubble there to intercept rainfall. and to slow down a droplet and help it infiltrate in the soil. With this much stubble, the soil remained cooler. The evaporation of the water stored in the soil was much lower than what we see out there today. So keep these in mind, because in the fourth principle of ecology, written by E.J. Dijksterhuis in 1952, he stated that humans have found that nature abhors a void and provides plants through the processes of primary and secondary succession to fill the openness. We might declare that weeds are here to stay as a part of a healthy ecosystem. And so, why are we trying to get rid of them if they're part of the ecosystem and they're telling a story about change? Signs on the land can often be misleading. Look at this one out Highway 60 down in Brazos Bottom. It's telling us that a Shell gas station is coming and that it's going to have a neighborhood market, and everyone is going to be able to go get their breakfast taco. But look in the background at what was removed to make the lot for this 3 acre, 18-wheeler parking lot that would be at this Shell station. Look in the background behind the sign. That's giant ragweed. Look in the foreground. It's common Bermuda. It's King Ranch bluestem. And over to the right of the stake are 2 woolly crotons or doveweed. So they didn't plant those. They come up naturally from a disturbance. So Drucker said in 1973 that management is the art and science of making the correct decision. He said brush and weed control, chemical, mechanical, biological, and fire, those are the tools of management. He said management is making the right decision from what you see is the causal agent of change on the land. So a lot of people think that they ought to be out doing something. And so they're shredding, they're fertilizing, they're taking care of the cute little plants. Well, how did they get here after thousands of years and stay here? And they're still here, even with us here. How does all that work? And so what was the source of the problem that made the weeds come up? So look at these 2 old crusty guys at the bank in Uvalde. They're pointing at us and they're saying management is selecting the right things to do. So we look at the people, we look at what's happening on the land, and I want to share with you and examine in the time I have remaining with you what is going on in Texas. And I want to use data that has come out of the Natural Resource Institute, which is a part of the A&M AgriLife Extension Service that I work for. And we're going to look at the things that are impacting the future of agriculture, but at the same time, this is the future of our prairies. So we have now, in this year, we have 30.8 million people. When this data is summarized for a 5-year period up from 2012 to 2017, we had 28 million people, and we had 171 million acres in the state, and they say that 95% of it was privately owned. Well, look at the trends in the land, and look at this map of Texas. That's a satellite imagery of the illumination from all the lights that man runs at nighttime. Do you think that has any impact? Well, the data in this report comes from appraisal districts, USDA, and landowner surveys. And it's talking about land value, land ownership, land use. And it looks at working lands, the farms, the ranches, our family forests, and what we're doing today with the significance of wildlife in Texas. Going to look at economic growth, population growth, increased demand for rural land, land like around LaGrange, the high land values, the incentives to subdivide or sell, and the ownership and then the fragmentation and conversion that is taking place. So here we are much different than our other partners in the South on our population change and the predicted number of farms as compared to Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi. As our population grows, changes are going to occur in what we see. But look at what the land is doing in Houston. It was a part of the tall grass prairie of our wetlands. And look at the impervious surface that's being built, and look at the number of people that are there demanding things off of the land. So we have more people. But when I look at my 171 million acres, 83% of it is rural, and only 17% is in the areas that develop, like Dallas and Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. And look on the right at this Texas map, because the landowner is only one head, the landowner of our working lands. And then look at the dark green. That's the people living in the rural society. And then look at that population, that the rest of that is the urban people, the people that live in the centers where job and all the things of life are made available. So in 1997, we had 19 million people. In 2017, we've got 28 million. That's a 48% increase. And then look at the dark red. Those are the fastest growing areas. Look down where the Fayette Prairie is. Over there at, getting closer to Houston, Austin County, and maybe that's Wharton County, north of Matagorda County. Look, they're changing slowly. These are prime farmlands. They're prime agricultural lands. But around San Antonio up to Georgetown, and over into Coryell County and Houston, and over at Rosenberg, look at we're 100% change and what the population is doing. So 86% of the increase within the 25 highest total population growth counties. 86% of the increase. Look at this picture taken in 1945 at a cowboy looking at the herd of cattle outside of the Dallas skyline. Isn't that amazing that agriculture connects in and is next to the suburban and the urban zones that we have today? But we can see the things of industry and the things of economic business that draws people to these cities. So in 1950, over 60% of the people in Texas were rural. Is that right? No, 38%. And when I get to 2015, the number of people there living in the rural area is down around 17%. So look at how we've changed in the last 65 years. And so Texas leads U.S. job growth, and Texas is leading in the number of humans that are migrating into the state of Texas from not only the United States, but all of the other countries of the world. And they want a piece and a part of Texas. So the migration, look how if we had zero migration, then reproduction of the human would be the blue dotted line. If we had a very small amount, which would have been our 2000 to 2010 migration level, where our population would be. But with the migration that we have today, look at, we're supposed to grow to 55 million people. So the economic driver in the state of Texas is our oil and gas industry. Texas is the leading crude oil production state. And so because of shale and other formations that we have under the ground that occur pretty much statewide, but they haven't all been discovered yet. And so look at the oil production and the bottom dropping out back in 2005, and look at where we are back up into 2018. And so oil and gas, these are the places where the millions of gallons, barrels of oil and the natural gas that's stored down uh, at the Sabine Pass in the compression chambers. This is where it comes from. And so look at, there's oil and gas activity in the Fayette Prairie, but not like all of the other areas that have been discovered and are being looked at today. And those Northeast Texas, those were some of the earliest fields that were discovered. So nighttime illumination and the amount of change from 2012 to 2016 as urban sprawl, and I think humans are afraid of darkness. I wondered how we ever got to where we are today, but the land is for sale, and less farms and ranches, but more land being put in to small acreage land holdings. You know, a ranchito is 0 to 10 acres. A ranchette is 10 to 100 acres. And a true ranch today, big enough to make a living off of, would be somewhere between 12,000 and 20,000 acres. So look at what has happened to that land. And so when I look at the land, where is the greatest amount of activity and where is the greatest amount of price going up that we hear about? And in this report, these Aggie maroon colored counties are the ones that are taking off, and the land value has gone out of sight. And what it's done is it's made the land so expensive that no one can buy land to be in agriculture unless you're in a 1 acre uh, strawberries and blueberries and specialty crop area. But we're putting ourselves out of agriculture business. And so in uh, the hill country has just zoomed because everybody wants to live where the clean water is, the water that comes from the 1100 springs that makes the best Coors and Lone Star and Falstaff and Miller High Life after it goes through that land formation. So the large farms, look at in the Austin Hill Country area, the small places, less than 95 acres, they are the ones that are on the tremendous incline. And look at the red dotted line out in West Texas, it's 500-acre places as these ranches are selling off from one generation to the next. And then look at the number of absentee landowners. And the absentee landowners are what's identified in the blue, but look up in Gillespie County at the land fragmentation of people that are actually living there, or they live out of the country. Uh, and the things that are happening, it's happening where all of us are. And so net farm income, based on land ownership, size of the property, it's going up in this period, but not fantastic after taking a major drop. When you look at 1 to 9 acres and you go up to greater than 2,000 acres, this is showing you the kind of lands and the level of money that they might be making. Now, I've got 10 minutes left. And so look at this on the fragmentation, the ownership of the land. 6.1 million acres are impacted in the 10-year of data that was recorded. And if the change in the farm size is decreasing, it's the green. It's the 2,000 acre size farms. Well, the farm sizes that are changing to 1 to 50 acre and 51 to 100 acre, they're in the area of the Fayette Prairie. So farm size is not necessarily growing, it's actually decreasing at when I have 500 acres or less in size. So the working land loss, the conversion, here's where the Aggie maroon again, or the dark brown, is the highest change in working land loss. Y'all are less impacted by that in the area where you live. And yet we worry about realtors and land developers wanting to take the land that makes up the Fayette Prairie. So look at the rate of conversion. In the 1997 to 2017, what was the land use changed to? The greatest one and only one that's positive is wildlife management. The grazing lands went down 4.6 million acres. The cropland declined 3.1 million acres. The timber went up 537,000 acres, and other kinds of land went down about 300,000 acres. But look at the increase for wildlife management. Can you name me any of the wildlife that people are going to want to pay money to go hunt and they eat grass? Why did Texas Parks and Wildlife say that in their estimate at the beginning of the settlement of Texas, they estimated in 1823 that we had a deer for every 42 acres in the state? Well, on the tall grass prairie at Denton, they had no deer. Not until the humans started planting trees there, and all the way down to Ponder, and all the way down to the north side of Dallas and Fort Worth. They started making wildlife habitat. And so 11 years ago, Denton opened up their first deer season in the history of their county because now they have deer. When it was just a prairie, what was in the prairie? If the prairie was a sea of grass and white-tailed deer only eat 9% of their diet year long as grass, they eat the weeds and the forbs, and then in a drought, they eat the woody plants. So where were we accommodating white-tailed deer? Wasn't on the tall grass prairie, but look at how many people want them there now. So here are our fastest growing cities, which you are aware of, and they're just to the east of you, and they're just to the north of you. And those people, when they retire, they want to move over and get the land that makes up the Fayette Prairie. So look at how land changes and how land gets subdivided, and look at where the farms are, and now look at where the roads are. Did y'all see that change? How the land from high altitude photography beginning in 1940, how McKinney, Texas went from prairie up close to where the Climber Prairie is, and that side of Dallas was all blackland prairie. And then look how it changed as urban sprawl began and started increasing, and look at what it looks like today in 2016 or whatever that date is at the top of the slide. So look at the change. What happened? Where is the land that we think is helpful? So look at this picture. You may not be able to see it, but it's a new pavement on one of your roads at LaGrange. And what it says is the final crop has been planted. We're covering up the soil of our state very quickly with buildings, parking lots, new highways, asphalt, concrete, and we're forcing the rivers to handle more water than they've ever handled historically, because these are impervious surfaces where about 96% of the water runs off. So changing landowners. The average landowner, the average farmer was 57 years old. The average forest landowner was 65 years old. In the next 20 years, the U.S. will see the largest intergenerational transfer of rural lands in the history of our country. That impact, that got me. So the younger generation is less tied to the land. The goals and objectives, they've changed. The new owners don't have the same objectives as the owners have today. The absentee owners even have a different set of land ownership objectives. So the Texas Landowner Survey attempts to understand that change. And so this is a very important slide What are the reasons for owning land? And the blue line is the millennials, those born uh, whenever they started in the late 1980s and up until this period of time. And then look at all the other people, right down to baby boomers like me. And I was born 4 years after World War II ended. So the reason for owning land is hunting, wildlife, for the family. Do y'all see Save the Prairie down at Nature, down at Legacy? See, water. Water is the number one critical element in the state. And so, what are we doing with these lower reasons? And look at what the top reasons are for why the people want to buy the land. They have a different set of goals. So, what are the primary wildlife species of interest? Look at this pie chart. Number one, white-tailed deer, San Marcos, New Braunfels, Comal, and Hayes County. The January census showed that they had a deer to every 3.5 acres. Ladies and gentlemen, they're jumping the fence at night, eating the rose bushes you planted in your yard. And we have created a suburban community on top of the prairies that now accommodates white-tailed deer. Ah, the poor deer. They're just out there starving to death. And yet we have more woody plants than we've ever seen today in the history of the state. Did you just plant a tree for Arbor Day? Mother Nature's beating you 1,000,000 to 1. Because from every tree planted by man, because of how we handle the land, 1,000,000 trees are coming up, from mesquite and huisache to other woody plants that we have. And it's not necessarily the post oak, the blackjack, and the yopon, or the loblolly pine that's down in your area on that part. So look at the value of land and the acres that are going up. Look at how the acres have increased in this wildlife trend. And is that because you have a population that doesn't have to work 24 hours a day? They're not like the farmer and the rancher or the dairy man that has to get up at 4:30 and then milk the cows twice a day. Do we just have 8 to 5 jobs, 9 to 5 jobs, 9 to 4 jobs? Or are we only working four days a week? And now I've got more time for pleasure. And everyone wants to hang up a hummingbird feeder so they can see the rufous hummingbird come to their backyard, a bird that's been passing through their yard for 6,000 years of migration. So look at the wildlife valuation trends and the acres that are affected now, greater than 100,000 acres in all those green counties. And so the wildlife valuation, the wildlife ad valorem tax was set up in 1995 and began in 1996 so that people wouldn't have to grow livestock to pay their taxes on the land. They would still get ag exemption if they were doing this set of 7 things to help manage the land. Well, at the time of settlement, was there any acre of land in Texas that wasn't being grazed by a herbivore? Maybe it wasn't cattle, sheep, or goats, but we had elk and pronghorn antelope. They are grass eaters. And then crickets and grasshoppers. We have all kinds of herbivores. But this wildlife valuation, why did that come about? Have you gone back and read the analysis of why we have taken on this wildlife trend? And so the grazing lease rates, look at the Aggie maroon ones. They're the ones that have gone up over $10 per acre for a grazing lease. What is the wildlife lease? Look where the wildlife leases have gone up. Do you see any of them where it says the wildlife and hunting lease rate has gone down? That's those yellow counties. One of them is in the Fayette Prairie. Can't get as much money as we used to. So here is the hunting grazing lease ratio of the things that are happening. So I'm almost through. Gary, if y'all bear with me for just a couple of more minutes. So where do the absentee landowners live? They live in the greatest of the metroplexes, and they will drive the furthest to get to their hunting lease, or to get out of town and go see the natural land. Look at how where they go from our surveys from the people that lived in Dallas and Fort Worth and down in the San Antonio metroplex area. So the sources of income from property by the residents. Number one, ranching. Some people don't have an income. Some people are getting an income from the residents from hunting. Look at the absentee, the blue lines. Ranching, no, they don't have an income. Hunting income, oil and gas, farming, timber, and others. And then where is ecotourism? The King Ranch found this out the fastest when their farming division was making $145 million in 1999, and their ranching operation was making around $80 million. When they got down to ecotourism for bird watching, it was a break even. They could only afford to have 4 staff on the ranch that had anything to do with ecotourism. That has now changed. So, in the next 10 years, how likely are you to sell your land? And look at the left, the millennials and others, not at all likely, 68 to 72%. So, the people who own the land, they want to hold on to the land, except for this second, third, and fourth group. And then at the far right, the fifth group says they're very likely to sell. Are those the people who don't want to have to do the things that maintain the land? Are there doctors and lawyers in town and they don't have any interest in being out on a property? They're too busy to even enjoy it. So in the next year, 10 years, how likely are you to transfer your land to family or loved ones? The highest bar says, I ain't transferring it to anybody. Except over on the far right, you got a group of the others and the millennials that say they're very likely, greater than 20%. But the people who love the land, they're not going to be transferring it to anybody. So we have a changing landscape. So what's the future of the rural Texas? Is there a future? The future is based on the limiting element, water. And the map on the left is showing you the water needs in 2070. Look at that dark blue. That's greater than 100,000 acre feet. The new pipeline to San Antonio out of Rockdale and the Wilcox Sand is only delivering 15,000 acre feet of water to San Antonio. That is enough to water 100,000 people. How many people live in San Antonio? 2 million, 2.7 million. And we stole water from one ecosystem and shipped it to another so they can wash their car on Saturday. Think about the trend that we're in. And then on the impaired streams, the streams of Texas and our rivers that are not functioning properly, look at the dark blue ones. Look where they are in the state. Places where the water cycle is already being changed to a detrimental level. You're not as impacted on the Fayette Prairie by that. So what's the future fragmentation of the land? And if you look at this map, again, the dark brown is where future fragmentation is the highest. And then the next thing, the round circles, is where's the water shortage in 2070, greater than 100,000 acre feet? Do the land use risk index match up with the water? Not quite, but it lines up also to the cost of the land and what the people want to use the land for. So look at the brown land use risk. Look at down at Cameron, Hidalgo, and Starr County in the Rio Grande Valley. They're at a water shortage already. They're in a high land use risk because in the winter garden down there, most of the land is being used for farming and for growing the citrus that our state enjoys. That's none of it's native to this hemisphere. All the citrus we eat are from Southeast Asia. And not all of it was destroyed by the Uri freeze. So look at the wind energy. Where is it taking off? And what counties? These are the counties that have the greatest wind turbines through 2018. Where's wind energy growing? Look, hardly any of it's down where y'all live. And then the wind energy, look at what they're doing. Look at the average wind speed and where these things are concentrated. So are we close to having used up the best places for building lakes for water? Are we close to using up the best landscapes that can make a profitable wind turbine and provide electricity? So here are the final thoughts. We're going to have more people, increasing human population, shifts in ethnicity, and more urban residents. We're going to have impacts to farms and ranches, loss of working lands, fragmentation and conversion, but not in all places of the state because of the water issue. Changing landowner perspectives, aging landowners, different objectives, largest intergenerational transfer of the land, communication to the public benefits of private lands. I don't think we're doing a very good job of how valuable our land is, that makes clean air, sequesters carbon naturally. And we're changing it. And we're inviting more people to be here and be a part of that system. But we still have wide open spaces. We still have large farms, and we have every size farm. We're kind of like Maryland. Some of the most intense farming is done on places that are no bigger than 2 acres in size. So the average farm size, it's still going to continue to change as the population is going to be changing. And so population percent change, top 25 counties, look at the dark green ones. They're the ones losing people. And how many counties are threatened by not having enough water right now? When we went into the drought of 1994 to 2002, almost a 10-year period, did you know that my city of San Angelo I grew up in, it declined by 10,000 people. Only 7,000 of them have moved back since we found water again. That means it rained. So nighttime illumination, and the gray ones up the 35 corridor and over around Houston and Dallas, that's where it's going to be the heaviest. So the no change index is all the gray counties. When I look at largest farms and ranches, largest decrease in population, lowest nighttime illumination, lowest development, there are your no change counties with a 0. So what would you do? This is September. This is north of LaGrange in Fayette County. And it's a piece of prairie, but the way it's being managed, it's covered up in doveweed. What could have been done differently? And so the grass, it's competing for the nutrients, it's competing for the sunlight and the available soil water. And these rains we've recently got have not replenished deep soil water. And remember, big blue stem is noted through research to put roots down in the ground up to 10 feet. 10 feet. If you got deep enough soil, the big blue stem will put roots down at 10 feet and be able to harvest water from that lower level. So, in our final conclusion, when we're looking at the prairies, life minus grass equals 0. So maybe Carol Gascamp feels the same way. Maybe Galen feels the same way. And John Watkins, how do you feel about that? So the final statement says, how you treated the people and the land, not your money and wealth or your accomplishments, is the most enduring impact you can leave on the earth. So, ladies and gentlemen, good luck. As things change, I hope your officers and the Native Prairie Association of Texas Fayette LaGrange chapter will invite me to come back. This was 87 slides in an hour, and my main PowerPoint on this topic has about 250. So I'm not going to run out. But Gary, thank you for asking me to be there. I don't see the chat box on my screen. I'll take and enjoy to take any question that somebody might have put in the chat box. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for the invitation tonight to be talking to you, the LaGrange Native Prairie Association of Texas chapter, about a title that I have selected, Prairies, Change, and Weeds. Because I put this together this way because all of our prairies, the land resource is still there, but many of them don't look like a prairie. They have changed. And when the managers of those lands quit managing all of these areas of prairie, they turn into weeds. And so the weeds of a lot of the blackland prairie are what's dominant. Because if I go back and I look at the paper written by Fred Smines and David Diamond that came out in 1983, titled Remnant Grasslands of the Fayette Prairie in Texas, the thing that is outstanding is that the prairies had already changed, because Dr. Smines is telling us that in the Blackland Prairie system, one of the best and deepest farming soils that we have in the state, that 99% of the Blackland Prairie was put to the plow and it was farmed. And so I have to relate that to the early goals of people who came to the state. I have to not just look at the prairie and what it represents or the kinds of plants that grow on it, but I have to look at the people that immigrated and came into the area. They migrated down to the area because what did they think when they saw Texas? They said it had clean air, clean water, abundant wildlife, and deep soil for farming so that they could raise foods for the human being. And so, who came in to these 7 counties that are on my first slide, so that the Blackland Prairie of the partially removed to the south part of the whole Blackland Prairie vegetation area, the Fayette Prairie stands down toward the coastal prairie by itself. And it occurs in Washington, Fayette, Austin, Colorado, Gonzales, Lavaca, and DeWitt County. When I look at those lands today of the Blackland Prairie, what are most of them still being used for? They're still being used for agriculture. They're still in farms. They're still in ranches. And even as we look at this era of time, some of them that were farmlands that have been restored to grass are either in the cattle business with non native grass from other parts of the world, or we've planted the plants back that would be beneficial to wildlife. And so part of it runs into the trees. The 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 post oak savanna part of Fayette County, going all the way into Bastrop County and over into Lee County, or this black land runs into the coastal prairie that runs from uh, the western end of Louisiana all the way down the Tamaulipan province down towards Ciudad Victoria in Mexico. And so this land, it's very peculiar because man defined a prairie and one set of notes as a sea of grass, meaning that the most noted plants of the prairie and the ones that the travelers could see were in the grass family. As they rode horseback, rode in their carriage, came in their Conestoga wagon, as they crawled, they were in grass. Now, that doesn't imply that the Blackland Prairie only grew members of one family, the grass family, because we do know that there is an sundry of wildflowers, an sundry of vines. There are things that were present, but natural processes like fire, like the bison grazing, push that piece of land that the best thing that would grow there would be grass. If the natural processes of these counties stopped, the Blackland Prairie might have turned into a shrubland. It might have turned into a woodland. So I'm just thrilled to be talking to your chapter that has such a great interest in the heritage of land that is in the county and surrounding counties where you live. And so this warms the heart of a range specialist to know that there are people that still care for the land. When I go back to this map created in 1996, the Blackland Prairie of our natural vegetation in the state, it is number 9 on this map. Look at it, labeled as the Blackland Prairie, as an andropogon and a stipa dominated prairie. But we know from this piece of work that Fred Smines and David Diamond and others that were involved that went and looked at the history of the prairie is that the stipa, the Texas wintergrass, uh, uh, it used to be Stipa leucotricha. Now it's Nocella leucotricha. That is a C3 grass that it probably came up as the grasses of the prairie were declining from overgrazing, the lack of fire, or misuse, or it was farmed land. So the stipa has been removed, and the Blackland Prairie has been put in line as the southern extension of the Great Prairie that starts in Canada, comes through the Great Plains and down into Texas. The species that are there, it's been put more in line with big blue stem, little blue stem, and yellow Indian grass. And it has been noted that the areas of the Blackland Prairie that are next to the creeks and the rivers, If they hold the water well, then a fifth grass that's named Eastern gamma grass, Tripsicum dactyloides, could be a dominant on those lower and well watered parts of the Blackland Prairie where the Fayette Prairie is. And it is very close to other areas that are being dominated by water and leading to Eastern gamma grass. But the thing about it is, it's a white bar, and it doesn't mean that every time I took a step, it was the same plant, it was the same prairie. Because, see, of natural disturbances, we're constantly changing the prairie, changing the amount of organic carbon on the soil surface, changing the amount of legume ratio plants to grass, and maybe increasing or decreasing the nitrogen fixation that was occurring in the prairie. And with the human getting there, how much more mesquite came up, how much more huisache. And these are woody plants that are also nitrogen fixers. And so our grasses aren't fixing a whole lot of nitrogen, but they use the nitrates, the nitrites, the nitrils, and other nitrogen containing chemicals, compounds that are down in the soil. So farming depleted them. And now, when farming left because I couldn't make any more money, what did that prairie that was dominated by little blue stem and yellow Indian grass with some big blue stem, what did it become? And that is the era of the change in the prairie that we're living in today. And that in that change, we are actually being threatened with another change, and that's that the humans of our society want to own that same land and not maintain it as a prairie, but do a different land use on that land. And so it becomes, which one is going to win? But it's trying like to figure out who came first, the chicken or the egg. And so, what is the future of this piece of land? And as I have communicated with your training coordinator, we wanted to look at the factors that are creating change. And so I want to take you down a trail that is the past, but it and the thinking that we had about prairies and what we have led up to today and the present condition of the prairies that exist in Texas. Tighten your seatbelt, get ready, hold on. Here we go.